Hi, this is Amy.
And Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, Certified Academic Language Therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called
The Dyslexia Duo. So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us. We have two very special guests. Very, very seldom do we have two people on at the same time, but I think they are the Dyslexia Duo also, so I think this is just a match made in heaven for us.
This is a quadrigraph. No, that's a graphing. We'll have to come up with a name for us.
I think it was Marianne Wolf when she was on. She goes, now we're the Dyslexia Trio.
So we're the Dyslexia Quad.
Yeah,
love it.
You would go ahead and introduce yourselves to our audience. Tell them who you are and what you do, and just a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So I'm Dr. Joyce Pickering. My background and my certificates are as a speech language pathologist, and also as a certified academic language therapist and qualified instructor, and a licensed dyslexia therapist in the state of Texas. I'm also trained and certified by the American Montessori Society as an early childhood Montessori teacher. So all of those things have combined to produce what I do now. And I'm still at Shelton. I think this was my 35th year there, worked at many other places before. So Shelton School is in Dallas, Texas. So that's where I'm located as the Executive Director Emerita.
Nice. Thank you.
And I'm Amy Kushner. I have had the joy and privilege of working alongside Dr. Joyce Pickering for 31 years at the Shelton School. I've held many a title working through that career, but currently I'm the associate head of school for early childhood through 6th grade. Similar to Joyce, I have my background in reading therapy and Montessori. So my Montessori is at the elementary level. And Joyce and I will definitely get into this beautiful, beautiful relationship that can be established between Montessori and reading therapy.
And I think that's an important distinction to make, because I'm not so sure that if you're not trained at Shelton, that they realize the connection with Montessori and dyslexia therapy. I know the first time it was made known to me is when I was actually doing my QI at SMU, and they had talked about it there. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's good to know. I wasn't aware of that.
I can't wait to hear your take on this. In some of my undergrad work, I did a little bit of touch of Montessori education, and it was thrilling to hear how that you could incorporate Montessori principles into science education, into reading education, and across the board. And it was thrilling, but also I feel like it was just such a little bit of information that I gathered that I don't feel like I'm versed enough to incorporate that into my own private practice. So I'm so excited to learn from you both today.
Okay, so let's kind of start off. What led you to do where you are now? We all have or like a superhero, we all have our origin story. So what led you to where you are now, Dr. Pickering?
Okay, so everything that I will tell you is just amazing to me to this day. That the people that I needed to teach me how to do work with various types of learning differences just came into my life. So I had graduated from college as a speech pathologist with a wonderful head of that department. and began to work with children with speech and language disorders in a public school. After about 3 years, a person who had been there in that same school district where I was working came back to the state and went to University of Southern Mississippi and set up the Dubard School. And her name was Dr. Etal Dubard. And she taught me the Dubard Association Method, which was written specifically for children with hearing impairments or severe oral language disorders. And I had done this for a number of years when parents came to me and said, our children have been diagnosed with dyslexia. Basically, they'd been diagnosed in New York or in Boston because there weren't that many places in 1966 diagnosing dyslexia. In fact, many people said it didn't exist. It was just lazy kids who weren't trying, which was, of course, very frustrating to hear. So I did talk to our superintendent. Long story short, we were able to write a federal grant, Health, Education, and Welfare, Title III, and got funding for a 3-year study of dyslexia, how to identify and instruct children with this learning difference. So from 1967 to 70, I was the director of that program. We had a remarkable staff and were trained by a Dr. Charles Shedd, who was a clinical psychologist who was running programs mainly in the Southeast and Midwest, many different programs for children in communities where there was no help at that time for most children. Our program, as I said, went 3 years. It was truly miraculous that Dr. Shedd was available to help us because the progress and the research data showed very significant progress for these students. And I continued to use his program. And by the time we reached 1969, I was trying to use the program with 5-year-olds because I realized we were waiting too late when we waited till 7 or 8 years of age to start.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Sylvia Richardson then was a consultant on the program, and she said, this is working very well with some of these 5-year-olds, but some aren't ready for it. And I said, I know that, but I don't know what's underneath this. What should I do before I start this program? And she suggested I go to Dallas and see Dr. June Ford Shelton, who at that time was at Dean Learning Center, right next door to Scottish Rite Hospital. And she had worked in Oklahoma City with Dr. Richardson and Dr. Lucius Waits, who was also at Scottish Rite. And they had run an early childhood program in which they used the Montessori method and their knowledge of learning differences. And there was quite a span of different learning differences they had in that early childhood program. Dr. Shelton was a wonderful human being. She came to my program, and I went to her to have the training in Montessori. We started an early childhood program. Again, we were funded by Health, Education, and Welfare, Title III. And from 70 to 73, really put together this idea of combining the Montessori program with the multisensory structured language materials and methods that we were using to have reading remediation. And so a lot of this was very obvious how it could go together. Montessori's language program for reading, writing, and spelling is multisensory, explicit, very specific, all the things that a structured literacy program is. Well, she had put it together in a scientific way, but she had not put it together in the great detail that we could with the programs that had been written since Orton Gillingham wrote their program. So that's where I started to work with both of those programs and combining their strategies together. So from there, I've been in many places doing the same thing. So I was in Brazil for 10 years at the American School doing that program, both Montessori and language therapy. And then back in Sarasota, Florida, Louisville, Kentucky, and then Dallas, Texas.
Landed back home.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a favorite location.
You're just a pioneer. You're just one of the pioneers that,
Right.
that just led the path for all of us and changed people's lives all along the way. So we're grateful to you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Obviously I've heard her background story a few times being with her for 31 years, but still it resonates with me that she is a pioneer and she was walking alongside some of those same names in our field that were breaking ground in this idea that reading is not analogous to intellect. That there is not this, if you can't read, then you must have an intellectual disability too. This all was coming about in the 1960s era, this discovery. Yes, Jay Henshelwood knew it a long time ago, but it still was part of the culture that if you couldn't read, you must be dumb. So impressive. And like I said, I have just had the privilege and joy to be alongside her. My story is much shorter because I've been very insular at Shelton. So I went to Stephen F. Austin State University and got my undergraduate in early childhood special ed. And the population in which I wanted to work with was Down syndrome. So I did a lot of work during my undergrad with Down syndrome children and Special Olympics. Part of the qualifications to get that early childhood special ed is I needed to observe in what they called inclusive or exclusive exceptional schools that are serving various exceptionalities. So someone had told me about the Shelton School. I was from the area. And so during my spring break, my senior year in college, I went and observed at Shelton and it changed my trajectory. I could not believe at that time in 1994, Shelton had approximately maybe 200 families, considerably sized school for serving children with learning differences. It was going early childhood through 8th grade. Joyce had come on as the executive director in 1990. And what I saw was what I would consider best practice, which is to work with children with learning differences exclusively. You need to minimize the teacher-student ratio. They don't do well in a classroom of one teacher and 24 students. So they were at a 1-to-6 ratio, 1-to-5 in some classrooms. And then it was multisensory. And what I felt when I was in that environment was a joy for learning. A joy for learning that I didn't see even in my student teaching with neurotypical or children with exceptionality. So I immediately applied. And I remember sitting in Joyce's office for my interview with Joyce and at the time the head of lower school, Betty Glasheen. And I was just hoping and praying that they would give this 21-year-old a chance at this job. And they did. And then the story is written from there. Everything that is entombed in me, you could say, or part of my ethos and being, Shelton has given me, both the experience and the certifications, and then went on to get my master's through Dallas Baptist University, and then just have had truly the joy and the pleasure of serving children and families for 31 years.
How amazing to be exposed to that at such a early point in your career, honestly, because I knew I wanted to be an educator from 7th grade on, but I also had my mom was an educator. So I thought, oh, I'm really good at reading. I'll be a reading person, and to get my degree. And I can remember because I graduated from UNT in 91 and with a major in elementary ed, minor in reading. And I can remember walking into my first setting thinking, there's something going on here. And I don't know, because this is whole language era, right? I'm not sure how to teach these kids. And I was and again, no computers for me to research things with or anything. I felt like I was just grabbing at straws my whole time. And so I felt very lucky when in 92, I was hired as an MTA teacher like Melissa was, and to be put on that path. Mm-hmm. Maybe I didn't realize at age 23, 24, what a game changer this was going to be for my career and for those kids I'm going to work with. But it really was. It really was. And how lucky, I don't mean to bring it back to me and bringing it back to you now. how wonderful that you had that so early on.
Correct. So Joyce has often said that it's great to get somebody before they've been exposed to too much education, because we can build them from the ground up and not have to break down some of those habits that you can tend to collect along your education career. So she definitely took me from the ground up.
That's wonderful. You're so well spoken and get your point across so clearly and succinctly. It just is wonderful to listen to you and to learn from you. I know I've done some continuing education with you and I just learned so much. So I'm grateful.
Awesome.
So using both of your knowledge and expertise, what is dyslexia? Joyce, would you like to start?
Yeah. So the International Dyslexia Association, IDA, and the National Institutes of Child Health and Development, NICHD, define dyslexia as dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability characterized by difficulty with accurate and fluent word recognition and poor spelling and reading decoding abilities. So these difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. And so this is a long definition. There's even one more statement that it is definitely not caused by or dependent on intellect or other effective teaching that they may have had. This is truly a neurological difference. And I think that really is what is key for a person to realize who's going to work with these students. It is physical, it is neurological, it is not they won't do what you're asking in a traditional way. They can't.
And they have to be taught explicitly in order to do so.
Yeah. So I would boil that down to dyslexia is a difference in the processing and integration of visual and auditory information, which causes intelligent individuals difficulty in learning to read, write, and spell.
I like that.
Joyce and I are about early intervention. That has been something that has been our pulpit from which we have spoken. If Joyce and I spoke yesterday, and if we were to also add something else to this definition, it would be these signs of dyslexia do present themselves before the elementary years. And those are marked delays in language and marked delays in perception. That visual and auditory discrimination, you can begin to see those soft signs. Reed Lyon has the best quote that gives me chills, and I lead with it anytime I talk about early intervention. And he said, if you can identify and begin instruction at the age of 5, a child who has at-risk signs for a learning difference, they have a 70% greater chance of meeting grade level expectations by 3rd grade.
It's significant.
Wow.
Significant as compared to those who don't get identified by 5. And with that, it always is like, oh, I just cringe. Why wait? Why are we waiting? There is no risk to early intervention. There really isn't. If you don't need it, great. You'll move faster.
Right.
But if you need it, it's right there for the taking for you. And it saves years of self-esteem damage.
So, Amy, could you share with our listening audience some things that parents might be looking for in that preschool age, 5-year-old range? What could they be seeing?
Absolutely. And it can even go back earlier than that. So Joyce worked alongside someone named Dr. Sylvia Richardson. She was a phenom. Not only was she the former president of IDA, but she was a speech language pathologist and a Montessorian. And she kept butting up against some pediatricians not wanting to intervene early. They would just say, oh, it's just developmental, they'll catch up. And no matter how much research she presented them about the early signs, there just wasn't this give. So you know what she did? She went and got her doctoral degree in pediatrics because she said, well, if they won't listen, I'm going to do it from my pulpit now. I mean, you got to love that. But along with that, she wrote papers and did the research on the early signs of learning difference. And it is this acronym called CLAPS. If you are to look for the soft signs of a child who is at risk for a burgeoning learning difference, look for delays in coordination, which is your C, language, your L, attention, A, perception, P, and social emotional, which is the S. Now, we always like to say, watch the attention. Every 2-year-old looks attentional. I'm sorry, they just do. But neurologically, the human brain prunes between 2.5 and 3.5 years old. A lot of sensory inputs that you do not need and you cannot exist with. A lot of those sensory receptors, it prunes them so that you can begin to have what's called an adequate central nervous system. So you're not oversensory to your environment. Because prior to that age, think about the absorbent mind of an infant. They're putting everything they see in a couple different holes, whether it's their ear, their nose, or their mouth. And it's because they're on sensory overload. You see it when a parent tries to take a baby to the grocery store at 2 years old at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's not going to go well because their central nervous system has processed so much information, bombarding them because they have so many sensory inputs in their brain. We've got to prune that. And so beyond that age of pruning is when you can start to see that child having difficulty switching from preferred to non-preferred, or giving some attention to things at an elongation of maybe just 2 minutes or 3 minutes if it's not of high interest.
Wonderful.
Wow.
That is so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Joyce, do you have anything to add to that as well for parents?
Well, I think when many parents learn that their child has been identified with a learning difference, they are afraid. Mm-hmm. They're very worried. They don't know a lot about what this means. And they ask questions like, oh my goodness, will he ever go to college? There are so many strengths and so many talents that are in a person with dyslexia who has trouble with a key door to education, reading, writing, and spelling. When you think about how do teachers grade you and what are your assignments, usually many of them are written. And so if you can't read well and you can't write the answers to things just get worse by every grade. But if you get the intervention early, which is just the joy that Amy and I have in working in those Montessori classrooms with children 3 to 5 or 6 years of age, we do not diagnose them at that age. Usually diagnosis takes place, formal diagnosis, about age 6. But you don't have to have a diagnosis to help the child and to work with them. You observe the difficulties, and if you've been trained in the strategies, you begin to work with them, filling gaps before they develop deeper and deeper gaps in their information, particularly in literacy, but in all areas that they might have difficulty. However, most dyslexics who may be struggling in reading, writing, and spelling will have strengths you see in other subjects like math and science, and a great interest in that. So trying to explain to parents, this is something that is treatable. We cannot cure dyslexia. It is not something that there is a pill or an operation for, but we can remediate or instruct them in ways that will allow them to function in classrooms throughout school. And yes, almost all of these students aspire to and do go to college. I mean, we have 101 students graduating at Shelton this May, and all of them have been accepted at colleges. Sometimes they've been accepted at multiple colleges, and they have received, I don't know the exact number, but it's usually over $5 million in merit scholarships, which blows our mind that, they have gained such ability and such confidence, yet they may still have a slower reading pace, and they've learned to cope and deal with things that they know that they have. And if they didn't know, they would just be like, what is this? Why can't I do it the way everybody else does? Or that's what they think.
Wow. That's awesome.
But you can give parents a great deal of comfort that this is not the tragedy that they may be thinking it is.
Right, exactly. And I've sat in enough in the public ed 504s before everything moved over to special education, and enough arts to sit with the parents. And when they initially get the identification, a lot of them are in shock. But then when you talk about things that you think are qualifying pieces, they just go, oh, I did this, or my brother did this, or my dad does this. And they start to put the pieces together themselves, I've noticed. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents, because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi, this is Amy Rodenroth, and as part of the Dyslexia Duo podcast team and owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services, I want to talk to you about my business. Our COUT-trained team offers expert virtual or in-person therapy located in Prosper, Texas, using proven dyslexia curricula like Take Flight, Build, MTA, Alphabetic Phonics, and Reading by Design. We also provide crucial independent evaluations and advocacy services. Don't wait. Empower your child today. Visit www.discovereed.com to learn more. That again is www.dyscoveread.com. Discovereed, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show. So I want to kind of jump to a similar but different topic. We hear the term neurodiverse being thrown around quite a bit, to the point where it's typical. It goes from atypicality to being typical to be neurodiverse. But what is your best explanation as to what is neurodiversity? What is that?
Neurodiversity is a term which was first used by Dr. Gordon Sherman, who was part of a study of the anatomy of the brains of individuals with dyslexia and those of typical readers. This study was done at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, and it was quite a lengthy study and very complex. They actually autopsy the brains of these people to see is there a physical difference? And there was in several ways. And we know it functions differently. So the result of this study and papers that Dr. Sherman and others wrote is the scientific recognition that not all brains process information in the same ways. The sensory systems of our body, visual, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic, motor system, are processing sensory input constantly. It can be processed accurately or inaccurately. For people with neurodiversity of dyslexia, they're very erratic in their processing. One time they read the word correctly, the next time incorrectly, 2 lines later, correct, 3 lines later, incorrect again. It seems like they're not trying, but they are. This task of learning to read is overwhelming to somebody who is not processing accurately in a consistent way. So one of the things that Dr. Sherman always said in his lectures is the brain of a person with dyslexia is not abnormal or damaged. It's just different anatomically and functionally.
Very good. Thank you.
You know, while you were speaking, I was thinking about how you had mentioned earlier about the integration component to dyslexia. And I've seen that a lot with my students. They just seem to have a difficult time integrating everything that we're giving to them all at one time, especially when they're first starting. And of course, I guess as the development occurs, they are able to integrate that everything more fluently.
I'm glad you mentioned that word because it's key to me, and you don't always see it in these definitions, but you have the temporal lobe processing the auditory information, and right next to it, the occipital lobe processing the visual information. Now, it has to be processed pretty rapidly, and the coordination between the two as they meld this information together and integrate it has to be in sync. And if it's not, then the person has, of course, this kind of difficulty with getting these inaccurate perceptions.
Do you think that, as far as ADHD students being so prevalent in the dyslexia population as well, do you think that's also part of that integration disorder? That it's just all they're all very similar in their disability in that way?
Well, ADHD is a different condition. And you're right, it's coexisting or comorbid with dyslexia a high percentage of the time. But where dyslexia is because of the processing integration disorder, ADHD as a disorder is a neurobiological difference in which the neurochemicals in the brain that release to help us focus are not releasing appropriately. And so it's really, Amy and I often refer to this as a double whammy. I'm processing incorrectly a good bit of the time, and on top of that, my attention won't hold.
Right. So that integration becomes even more difficult.
Yes.
Correct.
That's fascinating.
Very good.
Correct. And we also know that progress in anything is bound by memory. And so for the dyslexic, it takes many more repetitions to get that integration to solidify. And then for the ADHD, it takes many more repetitions because we don't know at what point did you zone out or not.
Right.
So this is what makes reading therapy instruction seem daunting to the child and daunting to the parents, and why it's not a quick fix. It just takes many, many more repetitions to concretize the information. And let's be clear, it's like 635, which is a major highway in Dallas. It's always under construction. We're always building.
And there's traffic jams.
And there's traffic jams.
And, it's interesting because dyslexia does run in families, and quite often you'll see siblings with dyslexia, and parents expect, well, this older one went through it, so with this one, it should be a similar path. Honest to goodness, I've had identical twins in my setting before who had different strengths and weaknesses in how they exhibited their dyslexia, which I always thought, somebody said, too bad you're not writing a paper. I was like, I know. But I think that's something that families should understand. Even if you have multiple children in your household identify, they're going to follow a different path on how quickly or not quickly they internalize reading and spelling and writing and everything that has to do with academics, for sure.
It really depends on the severity of the difference and the complexity of the difference. So we work with some children who are just dyslexic, and we work with others that are dyslexic and ADHD. And the ADHD is mild, moderate, or severe. We work with children that have dyslexia, ADHD, and a communication disorder. So the more components to the learning difference, the more complex it is, the more this child is having to deal with, and the more that we have to have a lot of knowledge of these different therapeutic processes that we can use with them.
So I guess that leads me to wonder, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, talking about therapeutic processes. How does the Montessori method play a role in dyslexia therapy?
Good idea, Melissa. Good transition.
It's very interesting. So the history of Dr. Maria Montessori includes her achievement as one of the first women to receive a medical degree in Italy. And after her graduation, she was assigned to direct the orthophrenic school for defective children. What a terrible name.
Mm-hmm.
But any child that didn't learn typically was defective in the vernacular of the time. She worked with two other French doctors, and they all had the same question. What can be done to help a child who is not learning to increase their ability to gain academic skills? So the answer from psychologists and educators of her day, the late 1800s, early 1900s, would have said nothing. There's nothing you can do. You are born with an IQ of 85. You will die with an IQ of 85. Education cannot change anything. She didn't believe that, and neither did these other doctors. So as she worked with children that were then called defective, she developed theories on how children learn. And with the other doctors, she developed manipulative materials and some of the therapeutic strategies that she was going to use. She was a scientist, so she did this by the scientific method, have a concept, do experiments with it, try different things with the students you're working with, keep what works, don't keep what doesn't work, and you are very much observing very deeply and individualizing to different children. So they developed these materials that are still used in Montessori classrooms that are manipulatives that help you teach a child a concept in a very concrete, hands-on way. And she has them in every area of the curriculum. So just giving you an example of the math curriculum, in starting to work with children, there are 3 different activities that are hands-on that have to do with learning number to quantity from 1 to 10, and then on up to 20, and then the teens board and the hundreds board, and the decimal system is presented to children in the preschool early childhood class where 3-year-olds are there. You couldn't do that out of a book. You can do it with these manipulatives. There are beads that are a 1. There's a bead bar that's a 10. There's a bead square that's 100. And there's a bead cube that's 1,000. So these are not only visually different, they feel different, they weigh different. It's sending sensory information into the brain. So just an example to tell you, without seeing it done, you can't imagine how you would introduce that concept to a very young child.
Joyce, I'd like to add in, she got the best too, because let me tell you what Montessori did. She said, oh, I'll take your defective children and I'm going to work with them. And after her work, this is what I love. She was a boss, late 1800s, early 1900s. She had her children sit for the normal exam to get into schools, just like all the other children, and her kids passed.
Wow.
So it was a Maria Montessori 19th century drop mic moment. And I love it. Because think about a woman's role in that era too. To be a doctor, first of all, was rare. Women were not working. Women were in the home and tending. And then to take these defective or deficient children. So when we look at that history, we really, really suspect those defective children were children at risk for a learning difference that had those soft signs of coordination difficulties or delays, language, attention, perception, social skills. And she took them, she created didactic multisensory materials. Doesn't this sound like the MSLIC accreditation, the MSLIC things? She did it systematically. She did it to where there was always this direct teaching involved. And then what I love, and this is one of the two things that I would always pair together if you're a reading therapist listening to this, observation is what drives your instruction. And it's what drove Montessori to create every material she has. And if you're a Montessori teacher, you have to take courses in how to observe children. Because when you watch how they manipulate the materials, or how they work, and you know this as therapist yourself, when you watch them write that letter, it's as if the brain opens up and reveals itself of how they're processing information. You don't get that on a test.
Right.
You only get it by watching. And I love her method is based in observation.
And one of the things that you're taught as a Montessori teacher is observation is not just looking. You're looking and you're doing the same thing a therapist does. You're analyzing, what is this child understanding? What aren't they understanding? How can I break this down into smaller parts to help them move toward understanding? After she left the orthophrenic school, she started in 1907, the Casa dei Bambini, the first school that she had in Rome. Casa dei Bambini is translated into English as Children's House. And she was working with typically developing children in a slum district. And of course, some had typical skills and others had learning differences. And she kept watching them. And she always said they taught her how to teach them because of using this scientific method and this intense observation. So getting to how does Montessori support students in written language? So she has a whole curriculum called the sensorial curriculum, which is helping children learn to develop their fine motor skills and their eye-hand coordination and to discriminate differences, gross differences, which become finer and finer and finer and finer, visually and auditorily through their motor system. So she is doing the foundational skills to get them ready for the academics. And when she starts into her language curriculum, it begins with something called the sandpaper letters. So this is a very fine-grained sandpaper on a tablet, and the child traces it and says the sound. And so that's all you need to learn to read right now. You don't have to know the name of the letter. You have to know that this letter that you're tracing says t, and you trace it 3 times, and then you write it on unlined paper 3 times with the teacher assisting as much as you need. And then you have another letter that you introduce. So you're introducing two at a time. So you're the discrimination. This letter says ah. This letter says t. Show me ah. Show me t. What is this? What is this? That's Montessori's 3-period lesson that is helping the teachers see, do they have the receptive language for it? Do they have the expressive language for that sound? If they do, wonderful, they might add another letter there. If not, they'll keep working for however long it takes that particular child to start remembering what these letters say. And then there is a whole group of activities that you present to the child in sound boxes where they work on sound discrimination. So this is phonological awareness that they're working on. And then they have the movable alphabet. So they have pictures of something like a cat, and then they have the letters that you can pick up and move and put down. And this is really the first lesson in reading and spelling. And reading and spelling are taught together along with writing. And so they use the movable alphabet, and at the same time, they're learning to write those letters through the feeling with the sandpaper letters. And when they have been taught to all those letters through the sandpaper letters, then they will begin to write and connect those letters in cursive. And so at Shelton, we teach only cursive from the very beginning because it is easier for children with learning differences who have spatial problems and directionality problems. So the directionality is minimized when you put the pencil down and write the letters through the entire word before you pick up the pencil. And the spaces are more obvious. So you go through all the CVC pattern words with the children. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
No kidding.
So that's what we do in the Montessori classroom, and with all the different vowels, and then moving on into the long vowel pattern with the CVC with the final E. So it combines perfectly, seamlessly with a language therapy program. So we introduce everything with the manipulatives, and then we take them into the actual formal lessons in the program that we're using with them, which for the younger children, it is the C program, Sequential English Education.
Is this something that's exclusive to Shelton? Is this something that you guys have marketed and sold elsewhere? How does that work?
Yeah, it's available on our website, and we do training in 4 different language therapy methods at Shelton through our outreach department. So we train in the C program, Take Flight, MTA, the Do-Bard Association method.
Okay. And Joyce has recently worked on taking some of those first principles of Montessori with the development of phonological awareness leading to the alphabetic principle, leading to that sound symbol and blending of CVC words, and has built a kit called the Early Literacy Kit. And it's something that's purchasable on the website. And for each mini lesson, there's a QR code that leads you to a video of how to instruct in that. Part of Joyce's mission, and I know this kind of crosses over to outreach a little bit, is to not be insular. We are all in this together. And our commonness is helping children, period, end of story. It doesn't have to be bound by a certain methodology or this is mine and I want to capture it. So she has always been asked, can I have a copy of your PowerPoint? And some would ever hesitate. No, I don't want somebody to have a copy because they'll just copy it. She's like, take it, take my PowerPoint. I want you to use everything I say to you. So this early literacy kit is part of that ethos in her being. You don't need to have Montessori, although as beautiful as the method, but we can use some of those principles from it and create a kit that a teacher, whether you are a reading therapist, a practitioner, or just an elementary teacher that goes, I need to help these kids and I don't know how. This kit with those videos of how to instruct can help you.
That's wonderful. And I appreciate that because, our goal, Amy and I's goal with this podcast is to increase awareness across the board and to share this out with as many people as possible. And unfortunately, we don't have that ability to go to all the different schools. We're hoping that maybe this will just spread that awareness and get some more resources out to people. And so this is wonderful that you're sharing that. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Absolutely.
So I was taking notes while y'all were speaking, and a couple of things. One, you had said that observations are important. A lot of us get trained to practitioner or therapist, or we're dyslexia teachers because we've had that dyslexia training. And I feel like some of our people just get stuck in a curriculum. This comes next. This comes next. I'm going to do this next. But part of being therapeutic in your approach is observing what your group is doing. And everybody in that group is doing something a little differently. And you want to address and support or maybe realign what they're doing. So I thought that was a really good point to bring up. And then a funny story, I used to do sandpaper for spelling deck with my students when I first started. And so I was a young teacher. Well, I was a young teacher and I bought the wrong kind of sandpaper, apparently, because
did they leave you with no fingerprints because it was too rough?
I go, and they go, and they're right there, ow, 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 ow. And I'm like, what are y'all doing? Me.
That's awesome.
I'm like, what are y'all doing? And they're like, our fingers hurt. I'm going, okay, stop. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. I don't want to send y'all home with bloody stumps.
Amy, that is hilarious.
The sandpaper on the sandpaper so fine that all it does is tickle the finger. Now, we also use in the C method something called the memory board. You want to describe that, Amy?
Yes. So, Amy, that is a great story. So anyone out there who's trying to make sandpaper letters, get the lesson is get the right kind of sandpaper. But something that actually, is probably even better than sandpaper is if you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever store that you would want to go to, home supply store, there's something called a masonite board where one side is smooth and then the other side has a rough texture to it, not too rough. We call that the memory board. We go into these hardware stores and we ask them to cut it into, it's approximately, probably, what would you say, Joyce, like a 6 by 12, 12 being the landscape, 6 being the height. And it becomes something that we ask them whenever they're doing that VAKT or that visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile integration, which has been our key word for today, integration and observation. When they're doing that feeling of it, to do that on the memory board. So elbow up, either 2 fingers or 1 finger, depending on, it's 2 fingers if it's a younger child because they need more sensory receptors involved. If it's an older child, 1 finger is enough. Or if you feel like they have memory issues, maybe you need to go to a 2-fingered approach. Elbow up, and they're just tracing on that memory board as part of visualization whatever that spelling pattern or maybe the letter formation is, and they're saying it as they trace it. So it's similar to that skywriting part that was always part of alphabetic phonics and kicking it the old school way where you would hold up. So it's the same idea, but adding the tactation. And of course, if your elbow's up, you're getting that shoulder stability and that gross motor kinesthetic in there too. So we always love to play a game with the memory board when we're doing trainings anywhere. And this is one of those, it doesn't have to be bound by a reading program. It truly is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You could ask somebody to memorize your phone number by saying it and writing it 3 times on the memory board, saying it and writing it 3 times on paper. And at the end of class or the end of our teacher training, we'll say, okay, what was our phone number again? Or what was that series of digits that are just innocuous and you can't attach meaning to them? And they'll remember it like that. So the memory board's a great technique.
Going into all those senses, there's a better chance of memory. And one of the things that Montessori talked about was if you present a lesson on a child's developmental level, learning will take place. If you're at too high a level, it's going to frustrate them, and too low a level, it's going to frustrate them and they will not store it in memory. So that's the art of teaching. Where is that match?
Mm-hmm.
That comes through really intense observation.
In the process you were describing, I just came off of a Seminar 8 for a group of trainees in alphabetic phonics MTA that I'm leading. Seminar 8, I'm finally made it to the end with this group. This is my first group to do it to the bitter end. And we were reviewing irregular words for spelling. And it was very, very similar to that same process. Name and write 3 times, name and write from memory 3 times, name and write the word. Very similar processes. A lot of what I'm hearing, I'm like, we can align it to our therapy, everything we do. This completes part 1 of our interview with Dr. Joyce Pickering and Amy Kushner. Join us next week as we conclude our discussion. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at the Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
Family,
and teachers.
thanks for joining us.
Bye.